everybody. And as you know, I've been interviewing interesting people from all over the world. And today I'm thrilled to introduce Robert Lindsay Milne to you all from Canada. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. It's wonderful connecting with you all the way around the other side of the world in New Zealand.
And tell somebody, or should we say, tell everybody all about yourself. Or actually, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to correct myself. And I'm going
Okay.
to let people know how I got to know about you.
All right. How did you know? How was that?
Well, Alba Weinman, who lives in America,
Right.
is an international hypnotherapist.
Huh.
And her and I were brought together through a very bizarre set of circumstances. And we ended up working on a project together called The Discourse, which ended in a book and being available on Audible and on Kindle. And so we keep in touch. And she phoned me and she said to me, I've just had a reading with a man from Canada, and it was very interesting. And I thought, wow, I haven't had a reading for a while. And oh, if it comes from her, that's high praise. So I'll give it a go. And hey, presto, met you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I thought, what an interesting man, because we had a little chat just before we started our session. Well, when you started your session with me,
Hmm.
and I thought, here's a man with such a big heart and a story, and his story definitely needs to be shared. So thank you so much for honoring us with your presence today.
Well. Thank you for being interested. Um, I've been a professional psychic for 56 years. And in that time period, I've done more than 100,000 psychic connections. And it's been my life purpose. It's been what I was born to do. And I was born to be a psychic. I know I was because I survived by my intuition and psychic ability even as a child. And it's how I survived in the world. I came from a pretty severely abusive background. And I often got hit or well, maybe even beaten. And put down in many ways. I remember coming home from school one day. It was it was I either would have been in kindergarten, so I either would have been 5 or in grade 1, 6. And that was back in the days when kids went home for lunch and mothers were there. And I came in and I said to my mother, Grandma Harris died today. And Grandma Harris was my great grandmother, and she lived in London, England. And I'd only seen her once in my life, and this was about 1955. So in those days, it took a long time for news to travel across the ocean. And so anyway, I came in and I said, Grandma Harris died today. And basically what I told my mom is that her grandma died. And my mother got very angry with me for saying such terrible things, yelled at me and hit me. I don't remember how often or how many times, but I got hit for that one. And the next night at dinner, my mother and father were at the table, and my sister and I were there. And my mother said to my dad, Grandma Harris died yesterday. And I thought my dad was going to get angry with my mother and maybe even hit her for saying bad things. but he didn't. And they talked about it. And I thought, well, I was 5 or 6, and it was very, very confusing for me. And I used to say things that would, Uncle Harold, that wasn't Aunt Sally. Who was that woman? That one definitely got me hit. So I would see things and say them, and then get yelled at, get scolded, and I couldn't understand why.
And your mother never apologized to you?
My mother never apologized to me for anything. She was a very violent woman and a very angry woman, and for her to apologize, she would have had to be accountable for her actions. She'd have to acknowledge what she had done to her children. So, and she certainly wasn't prepared to do that. So she was anyway. She was quite violent. Right around the time I was about 9. Now, a lot of people would have kept their mouth shut after that,
Yes.
but not me. I wouldn't. I wouldn't stop it. I wouldn't hold it in. If I saw something, I would say it. And at about 9 years old, my father took me to a Stanley Cup semifinal hockey game. Now that's a big deal in Canada, the Stanley Cup. And as I said, I was about 9 years old, and Toronto Maple Leafs and the Boston Bruins were playing. The series was tied 1-1, and the game was tied 1-1, and the game went into overtime, fourth overtime period. So the teams went off the ice, and the ice was cleared. And when the teams came back on the ice for the first overtime period, the fourth period, I knew number 17 with Toronto Maple Leafs was going to score. The game hadn't started. In fact, it was so real, in my mind, he already had scored. And I was getting really fidgety because nobody else was knowing it. And so, anyway, the referee called the teams to go to the bench. And by the way, number 17, Gary Eamon, was not a first string player. He went to the bench at the start of the game. So imagine at Maple Leaf Gardens, there's about 18,000 people in the building. We're at the end, in end corner, and the lights get turned down. The entire building is silent, and just as the referee goes to drop the puck, I couldn't hold it in any longer. And I jumped up and started yelling and screaming and cheering that Gary Eamon had scored, yet the game hadn't started and he wasn't on the ice. And 18,000 people turned and looked at me and my dad. and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Sit down." And I did. And then the referee dropped the puck and the game started. And I realized then that nobody in the building knew that Eamon was going to score. And then a couple of minutes later, Gary Eamon jumps over the boards, and a guy named Red Kelly passed the puck to him, and Eamon tipped it in the net, and the building just erupted. People yelled and screamed, and the flashlights were, or the camera lights were going off, and it was just unbelievable, the yelling and screaming. And I was looking around at the people, and said, I see differently than others, and that was when I knew what had been happening, and I knew then what I was going to be doing with my life. I didn't know exactly what it would be. and I didn't have a label for it, but I knew it had something to do with what I'd been experiencing, and I knew that then.
So, Robert, that was your first real aha moment of, wow, I'm actually seeing something that other people aren't.
It wasn't so much like hallelujah moment. It was it was just a sense of understanding, and it also helped me from getting beat up again too, quite often. Now I got to say there's a little bit more to that story, because I'm not that spiritual a person, but remember, I'm only like 9 years old at the time. So Saturday mornings, Saturdays we would get our allowance, my sister Gail and I, 25 cents. And we would go to the movie theater, and for 25 cents, you would get in the movies, and there would be, 2 full-length movies, and then one serial movie, and then there would be like 3 or 4 cartoons. You get a box of popcorn, a drink of Coke, and a bag of candy, 25 cents, right? So, the first game that I was at with my dad, that was on a Thursday night. Saturday night, they were playing again, and it came time for me to get my allowance. And I said to my dad, Boston's going to win tonight. And he said, no way. And I said, I bet you a quarter they do. And he took my 25 cents away from me, and he put it aside, and he said, okay. So I didn't get to go to the show that day, but I doubled my allowance that night. And now my dad, to his death, and by the way, his death was only last August this year. To my dad's death, he renounced my ability, my skills. He had said many times that I was the only person he knew that never had a job. He also said that he predicted. He said he would go to his death believing his only son's a fraud and a charlatan. He said he believed that. So
then, how did he explain that you could have your own home, that you could travel and do everything else, and all the time?
I was a con artist.
So how did he explain you knowing about the score lines?
That happened, 65 years ago, and I got so good at it that I started to let him win so I wouldn't get caught. So he wouldn't have noticed, because I would let him win every now and again. I would deliberately do that because I was enjoying hustling him. It was a lot of fun. So, as I said, I was about 6 or 7, and he just never believed it. He just wouldn't, and the reason for that is that it took away from his glory. It took his attention away from him.
But you were his child.
As I told you, I came from a severely abused background. The first time I left home, I was 14, and I lived in the streets in downtown Toronto in the wintertime, and back in those days, November to April, there was 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it was in the the minus 20s, and it was cold, and there weren't any welfare services for street kids and things like that. And I survived on the street by my intuition, my psychic ability, and my will to survive, and my willingness to work. I never once begged. I would always go to a place, a restaurant or something, and ask if I could, sweep the floor and clean and wash dishes for something to eat, and things like that. But I never ever begged. And my intuition kept me safe most of the time, and got me to the places where I could get taken care of. There were a few times where I had to do things to survive. When I was in that time, I was always offered, when I would be in trouble or in danger or whatever, I was always offered two ways to handle something. I was always able to use my intuition or psychic ability or that way, or I could do something illegal or immoral. And there was no right or wrong answer or way. What was, so there was no right or wrong choice. It was what I chose to do had a big influence on which way my life went, but there was no right or wrong choice. And almost every time I chose solving the problem with my intuitions or psychic ability, there were a couple of times where I had to do something immoral that to get out of a blizzard or something like that. And in my lifetime, I have never stolen anything. I have never stolen anything. Well, that lasted until I was about 55, but I'll tell you about what happened. I deliberately set up something to find out what it would be like to steal. So I was about 55 when I did that one. But even on the street, even when I was hungry, I would never steal. I just didn't do it.
And something was always protecting you then? What was it? Did you just follow your intuition, your gut, your GPS that led you? What do you think?
That's an interesting question. My psychic ability was honed on the street in the wintertime for my survival. That's a training. That's a boot camp that very few people have the opportunity to experience. That my skills were honed there. What made them even stronger, because if I didn't develop them, I wouldn't have lived. So I'm not sure what the question you asked was, but I forget it now.
You were being guided.
I never considered that.
Yeah. You didn't really know anything like that. You just did.
I didn't really know very much about that. And I always believed that it was my instinct that I was using, and it wasn't any spirits or God or anything. I just believed that it was what I could do, and it was something that was unique for me.
To you.
Yeah.
So when did you get your big break? Because I know you've traveled the world, you've been on the radio, you've done over 100,000 readings, and you've also had that Lady the Predator, the book. So there's so much to talk about. So how did you go from being on the streets for survival to actually becoming so well known?
The first step was I heard. Now at 14 and a half, the police caught me and took me home. And from the spring of that year until my birthday in July, when I turned 15, I was at home, and then I left again. And I never lived at home with my family ever again.
So it was
And
better to be on the streets than be with your family for you.
oh, a lot better.
Okay.
My mother actually asked me that question when I was in my 50s. She asked me that very question. So I had heard on the streets that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room in Toronto, and you did tea leaf and card readings, if you worked in the afternoon, you would get a sandwich, a cup of tea, and some cookies, and you would get paid for the readings you did. And then if you worked in the evening, you got a hot dinner, cup of tea and cookies, and you got paid. And I first phoned the Cozy Tea Room. I was 15 and a half. I called the Cozy Tea Room and applied for a job there. And the test was I had to do a reading for the owner, Mrs. Cox. That was the test. I had never read tea leaves before. I didn't know what the hell they could. And I had never read cards before. But I could do psychic readings. And so I picked up the tea leaf or the teacup, and I just held it up like this in front of me, and tuned into Mrs. Cox and did a reading for her. And then the cards, I had no idea what the cards. We didn't even have cards at my house when I was a kid. Anyway, I put the cards down, and I was a pretty good talker in those days, and I would just start to do a reading and incorporate the cards in the reading, and I would point to the card and the seven of hearts, and then I would just talk about what I was going to say, but I would entwine those cards. I didn't know what the hell they meant. It was just. And so I applied that day. I started working that day, and I worked both shifts, the day shift and the evening shift. And that night, and I got paid for those two shifts. That night I had a place to sleep, and the next day I had a job. And I worked at the Cozy Tea Room till I was about 21. And I worked there 5 days a week, sometimes 6, sometimes 7. And I worked there every day, and I did hundreds of readings. I started off doing hundreds of readings. There are some days I would do see 40 people, and some days I'd see 10. But it was like that day in, day out, day in, day out.
Sorry to interrupt you, Robert. Did you then get a name for yourself? Did people say, go and see Robert? Did you have return?
Oh, absolutely. Remember, I was a child, yes. and the people that were at the tea room, the people that were working at the tea room were old, and I very quickly, I was called the hippie reader, because like a lot of times in those days, I never wore shoes. Well, at least in the summertime, and I had really long hair. And I was a hippie. I was a hippie in that era, and very soon, people started coming to see the hippie reader. The hippie reader named Bob Milne, and that's what. And while I was never the actual top performer, I certainly was at the top, and the reason I wasn't the best was because I was still a kid. That was the reason. But I worked there up till around just after my 21st birthday,
and then
and I left. I'm not sure if it was I got quit. Whether I quit or got fired, because I wasn't always the easiest person to be around. And it really, at the tea room, in those days, for a tea leaf and card reading, in those days it was against the law to do readings for money. And that law didn't get repealed until July 1st, 2018, by the way. But
serious?
Yeah, oh, it was called the Witchcraft Act.
So you've been doing the Witchcraft Act against the law all these years.
Oh, up until July 2018. Oh, at any given day of my life, I could have been busted at any point in time. Could have gone to jail. Anyway, the way that people got around that law was the tea room would sell you a cup of tea and a sandwich, and you would get a complimentary tea and card reading.
Oh,
Tea leaf reading
complimentary.
card. That's correct. And there were several signs on the wall that would say, all readings are for entertainment purposes only. So I found out. So we got paid for $2.50. You got a tea leaf reading cards and a sandwich, and the tea room got $1.50, and the reader got $1. And that ate my guts out. It made me nuts and I saw it so early in my life that those people who had no talent were making more money selling my talent than me. And I figured that out at about 16. And it made me nuts. And I worked a lot. I was a hard worker and a good producer, but every now and again it would get to me, and I would either quit or get fired or whatever, and that would happen. And just after I was about 21, I think I quit or got fired, and for me it was the last time, and I decided that I wasn't ever going to go back there again.
And
And
what did you do to advertise for yourself then? What was your next move?
At the time when working at the tea room, I was living at this Fleabag hotel called Larry's Hideaway Hotel, and it was a Fleabag, but I could afford to live there. It was okay. And then when I left the tea room, I wasn't getting regular money, but everybody knew what I did. That at the hotel, and that there were a lot of ladies of the evening that both lived at the hotel, and many brought their clients to the hotel, and they were customers, clients of mine, and bank robbers and drug addicts and pimps and those people, and I quickly fell behind in my rent. And an older man that worked at the hotel at night at the front desk, his name was Whitey. Anyway, he died. Not on the job, but he died. He worked 4 nights a week. And when I heard Whitey died, I went to the owner of the hotel and said, could I do Whitey's job only? Don't pay me. I'll work in exchange for room and board. And he said yes. So I didn't have to worry about covering my overhead, and I was working at the hotel 4 nights a week. And it was there, working at the front desk at night. I had time to teach myself how to read and write, and because I couldn't read, I could barely read at that time. I still have trouble reading words, right? And it was at that time where, in those days, Toronto used to close at midnight. So by 2 o'clock in the morning, all the women of the evening would have completed their contracts with their customers. Their customers would have left the hotel. There were single working men that lived there. They would have been in bed, and the whole place would be empty and quiet like the lobby was empty and quiet until about 7 in the morning. And after doing that job for about a week, I went to a library and I went to the librarian and I said, I can't read very well. I'm wondering if you could recommend a book for me. And so she, took some time with me and she, gave me a book and I went back and I read it. It took me a couple of days, but I read it late at night, and that's where I started to comprehend, and that's where I became functionally literate.
But you're so resilient.
Yes. Yes, it's certainly being strong. Wonderful, I had the most amazing life, and I've had extremes. When I've had a bad period or something terrible happened to me, and there's been a lot, I think one of my skills to be able to just say, okay, that happened, let it go, focus on surviving and getting past it. That's been one of my skills. I think that's been that I'm just able to let go like that, and instead of focus on what I lost, I focus on where I'm going to go next, and that was kind of instinctive.
And Robert, look at you now. I mean, you do so many readings internationally.
Yes. Oh, well, here's how that happened. So there I was working at Larry's Hideaway 4 nights a week in exchange for room and board, plus any readings I could get. And I was getting $5 a reading in those days. And, that was okay. And one day I just said to myself, this is not what I imagine I want my life to be. And I thought, how could I get known more? And I thought, what would happen if I could do readings on the telephone? And it had never been done. Like, it wasn't being done in those days.
But you didn't have social media in those days. There was no Facebook,
nothing.
Instagram, or YouTube.
So what I started to do every day, incidentally, when I was about 21, when I left the tea room, I had decided that what this work is going to be my life's work. And I had heard that when a young man becomes a priest, the priest makes a vow to say a mass every day of their life. So I decided that if this was going to really be my work, that I made a vow that I would either do a psychic reading or practice being psychic every day of my life. And I made it past 30 years of never missing a day of practice. And the first time I missed a day of practice is I just wanted to know what it was like not to do it. I just wanted that experience, and so I was always working, always practicing. So I thought, I wonder if I could do a reading on the telephone. So I would call my friends, and I would practice doing psychic readings on the telephone. I'd never heard of it before. Nobody had.
From the hotel. From the hotel's telephone at the front desk.
Through the switchboard, through the old-fashioned switchboard. Yep. We all had, telephones in our room, but there was, yeah. And I would practice that every day. And then I would ask my friends to give my name or ask their friends if I could phone them and practice. And I did that for 6-8 months, and then I asked. Then I just gave my name out to people and said, if you want to have a psychic reading, just call me. And I did that, and for about a year, I was getting calls every day, and in the middle of the night,
But then how did
ring,
you get
ring,
paid?
hello, huh?
Well,
you're a step ahead of me.
Yeah.
That was the realization finally, after realizing I can do this, was how do I get paid? Because credit cards were not ubiquitous in those days.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to give me one there. And they would never have let me be a Visa merchant. So I thought, if I can do readings on the telephone, could I do readings on the radio, on the telephone? And I thought, maybe. So a friend of mine lived north of Toronto in a little city called Aurelia. And I phoned the radio station. And it was CFOR. And the program director, talk show host, and morning man was the same guy. I called him and I told him my name was Robert Lindsay Milne, not Bob Milne, and that I can do readings on the radio. And he said, if you can do what you say, you're on my show tomorrow morning at 9:05.
So he didn't test you first and get a reading for himself. He just took you at face value straight on
the telephone. Radio. Yeah, well, nobody was doing this. But then he said, if you can do what you say, you're on my show at 9:05. And if you can't do what you say, you're off my show at 9:10. And then he said, other than that, come on up. It was 100 miles away. And I didn't have any money.
Yes.
And I hitchhiked from Toronto to Aurelia, and I slept in the park, and I swam in Lake Couchiching for my bath in the morning that day. And the hotel or the radio station was broadcasting the talk show from Howard Johnson's hotel in Aurelia, and they were trying to get business for the dwindling business in the restaurant for Howard Johnson. So I just showed up. I must have looked like a wild man because, people were saying, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm on with Rusty Draper this morning. Oh, okay. And when I went into the restaurant, they were setting up the set. The place was empty. Only the people from the radio station. There was nobody coming into the restaurant. So I come on, and Rusty challenged me just right off the bat. Now, I'd never been on the radio. I had no concept of what we were going to be doing. And he challenged me on something. And I'll never forget it. I was just like 24, maybe. And I just he challenged me on something, and I said, there's someone with red hair named Richardson, and you talked about a job or something like that, and his face went pale. And he said, nobody knows that. And what he had been doing was being interviewed for a job. And the guy's name was Richardson that was interviewing. Okay, he wasn't kicking me off at 9:10. So we started taking phone calls, and by 9:30, people had come to the hotel and they were coming into the restaurant. By 9:45, the whole restaurant was filled, and there were people outside.
Because they'd never seen anything like this.
It had that's right. It was like Houdini.
Yes.
It was like Houdini coming to town, right? So at about 5 to 10, Rusty says, "Can you stay for another hour?"
Did you say,
"Sure, of course." Well, it was only 10 o'clock, right? So I said, "Sure." Then there was this huge lineup outside. And then they clear the restaurant, and then they fill it up again. And now this goes on. And now people are coming up to the microphone and asking questions going out over the air. And at like 10 to 11, Rusty says, "Can you can you stay for another hour?" And I said, "Well, sure." And the same thing happened, and we went up to. And then at about 11:45, I just looked at him and said, "I'm too tired. I have to stop now." So when the show was over, I was really spaced out. I'd never done anything like that. And I stepped down off the platform, and people just rushed me. And they just were, completely all around me, talking to me and yelling at me questions. And Rusty and the owner of the hotel came in that circle and grabbed me and pulled me out and took me down the hallway. And Rusty said to me, "Is there any chance that you could stay over and do the show tomorrow?" And I said, well, I have to tell the truth. I slept in the park last night, and I swam in the lake, and I'm really hungry, and I haven't eaten since yesterday, and I just have to go home. And the owner of Howard Johnson said, "We'll take care of that if you'll stay over." And then
because he could see his restaurant filling up.
Oh, absolutely.
Good for business. So it could be a win-win situation.
Well, wait till you hear it. So Rusty says, "If you do you do readings too, like privately?" And I said, "Well, yes, of course." And he said, "Well, we could get one of the girls at the radio station to book appointments for you." And he said, "How much do you charge?" Well, in Toronto, I was charging $5. And I said to him, $25. And he said, "You'll never get that here." And I said, "I don't care." Like Howard Johnson's was about 100 times better than Larry's Hideaway. And I had free reign of anything in the place. And so that night...
Sorry to interrupt you, but in the meantime, Larry's flea pit is going, "Where's Bob?"
Well, it was my days off. It was my days off. I only worked 4 nights a week.
Okay.
It was in the middle of the week. I wasn't missing work. I was already okay.
Yes.
Anyway, the same thing happened at the hotel the next day, and again that happened. And all in all, at the end, they booked 125 readings.
For $25 each.
At $25 each.
Love it.
It took me about 10 days, and I had a wad of money that big because I had absolutely no expenses at all. And so during that week I was...
Sorry to interrupt you again, because I know the audience is following this. So there you're doing those readings. When you're doing the readings, where are you doing the readings? Are you doing
in the hotel room?
Restaurant?
In the hotel room. My hotel room.
In the hotel room.
Yes.
So they come privately to you.
Oh, yeah.
And
125.
Feeding you.
And giving me the room.
And not taking a cut of the 25?
No, because it was bringing people into the hotel anyway, every day.
While they were waiting for you, they were having a coffee or a meal or whatever.
Oh, okay. Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, and then people started going into the hotel to watch the show because they never realized they could have so much fun or whatever.
So, Robert, to interrupt you again, while you're doing the private readings, in between those private readings, are you back with Rusty on the air?
No. Just two shows.
Just the two shows?
2 shows. That was it. So, but anyway, during that week and a bit, I was thinking, how am I going to get home? And, the first one is, I could take the bus. I could take the train. I could take the cab home. Now, remember, it's like this. I've never seen so much money. It was incredible. And then I thought, well, maybe I could catch a flight home. And there were no flights coming into Aurelia. And then I thought, wonder if I could charter a plane. And I phoned the Aurelia airport and asked if they had any charters. And they said, yeah, they had a single-engine Cessna. And when I finished doing readings in Aurelia, I took a cab to the airport and came home to Toronto in a single-engine Cessna and landed at Toronto Island Airport. And I took a cab to Larry's Hideaway, and I got a newspaper, and I went across to the Chinese restaurant and I looked up um, apartments, rented apartments for rent, furnished apartments, and I took a cab there and I paid 6 months rent in advance. Went back to Larry's and I put everything I could put in a taxi cab, and went to my new place, and I didn't go back to Larry's Hideaway again for years.
But Robert, how did you advertise then yourself? Did you do that in the newspapers?
Well, at the time, I was also during the day involved with an organization called, at one time it was called the New Age Center, then it was called Mind Awareness and Mind Development. And it was one of these New Age schools. And I became the psychic for the group. And then I became the person that was doing all the promoting, because I was doing all the radio shows and TV shows saying, come on down to, the New Age Center at 223 St. Clair Avenue West.
So, well, back the bus up. What TV shows? Because we only know about Rusty and the radio.
Oh, well, at that time, now I knew I could do shows. I would just simply call radio stations, tell them what I could do, and started doing it.
And so that brought in lots of much more money. And so you could just build yourself up.
I was still a hippie in those days, and what I was doing was bringing people into the New Age Center, and they were getting. I really wasn't getting that many readings. I was bringing the people in though, and then I saw the light, and that changed. So. Then I just started touring, and I started touring Canada, and I always traveled full time with a secretary, and we traveled. I traveled across Canada and going into different radio and TV stations. It was always set up, and then started doing shows in the States, and then in Britain, and then. Just one country after the other, including South Africa too.
So would you stand on the stage and there'd be a hall of people, and then you would just...
Well, at the radio and TV shows, I would do call-in shows, and what I would do. So when I would do a radio or a TV show, the routine that I would use is I would ask people, to call in, tell me their name and where they're calling from, have a question, but don't ask it. So, the person calls up, hi, my name is Mary. I'm calling from, the east side of town. And I'll say, oh, thank you very much, Mary. By the way, are you in your kitchen right now, right at the table? Okay, put your hand over the table, move it along to the right. There, is that where it got burned last night? Or, now remember, this was back in the days when the telephones were attached to the wall, right? So, okay, so, hey, George, you're in the living room now, is that correct? Yes. All right, if you turn your head to the left, will you be looking out the front window? Yes. Okay. Look above the window where the ceiling and the wall comes together. Is there a crack there? And I would do things like that. Or I would just start off talking to the person and talking about a subject, and then I would finish it, and then I would say, by the way, what's your question? And 8 out of 10 calls, the person would say that you just answered it. And I would say, oh, well, not everybody's psychic. Would you tell the people what the questions were? And that was the type of shows that I would do. And I did that for 35 years or something.
Wow, Robert, it's so interesting. When our son was about 3 or 4 years old, he was playing in the garden. And this just reminded me of it. I'd forgotten about it. And my husband used to listen to a band called the Smashing Pumpkins. And when I went into the garden, Max was playing in the sand pit or something, and he looked up at me and he said, Mum, one of the Smashing Pumpkins has just died.
Oh.
And I said to him, How do you know? And he said, because I saw it with my magic eye.
Wow.
That evening at dinner, we had dinner, and then the television went on for the news, and it said breaking news. One of the members of the Smashing Pumpkins has just passed away. And he looked across the table at me and he said, see, Mum, I told you.
Yeah. I was too busy ducking when I did those things, you know.
And I just thought, wow, you see, and I
Yeah.
think how many people this happens to and how many people are rejected. So yesterday when we had a little chat, when I asked you if I could have you so that people could learn more about you, you told me that everybody has this ability as such, or you could teach people how to do
Well, I actually did say both things.
Yes.
Now,
Because there will be
starting
people
with,
listening, and because sorry to interrupt you, so many people come to me and say to me, how I want to do this, but how can I do it? How is it possible?
well, do it. That's number one, just do it. So, probably not everybody can be psychic. Most. So if you would think of a bell-shaped curve, and at one end of that bell-shaped curve, there is one person that is absolutely zero in terms of awareness and being psychic. And then at the other end of the bell-shaped curve, there is one person that is absolutely 100% totally tuned in. And between that one and that one, the rest of us fit in. So most people are psychic, and being psychic is a natural, normal phenomenon that almost all mammals have. That sense of intuition, the instinct. It's what caused us, one of the things that caused us to be able to evolve from the caves. So everybody, or almost everybody, has this instinct. Have you ever been sitting somewhere and you look up and you see someone's been looking at you? Or it doesn't have to be, like gunning you down with their eyes or staring at you. But somebody looking, and you look up. Or you think about somebody and you get a text from them. Or you're walking down the street and you think about Charlie and you bump into Charlie. Or all of a sudden you think, oh, I shouldn't step on the road right now, and zoom, a car goes by, and if you hadn't have paid attention, you would have been run over. We all do that. That is a natural, instinctive skill that we mammals have. It comes from our middle brain. So, and we all have that ability. We can choose to practice that ability and expand it, or we can choose to let it
Just sit in the background.
That's right. We can choose to pay attention to it, or we can choose to ignore it. In my life, I chose to pay attention to it. It's what survived. It's what caused me to survive. Being psychic, if you look at the word psychic, P-S-Y-C-H-I-C, comes from a Greek root, psyche. And a psyche is a mind, a soul, or a self. And if you have a mind, a soul, or a self, and you use it, you're psychic. Now, what I tell people is become aware of what's obvious. And being psychic is using our senses. And we have, well, it's common. Now I've heard there's a whole bunch of other ones, but up until recently, we've had 5 senses: touch, taste, smell, see, hear. When we use all of those senses together, they form a sixth sense, extrasensory perception. And when those senses come together, they form a sixth sense that gives us a broader awareness. When we become aware of what's obvious, more becomes obvious. So, an example, I used to like to paint. Not pictures, I mean paint walls and houses, the inside. I wasn't very good at it. I thought I was. But it was the only thing I could do that was manly work, right? So I could dig ditches pretty good, but anything else I wasn't very good at. But I thought I got really good at painting, and I really loved it. I lived in one house for 5 years, and in that 5-year period, and the house was about 2,100 square feet. In that 5 years, I painted it top to bottom 5 times. I just did that. So, and I would help my friends. I'd paint their houses, and so that was just one of the things I loved to do. Had another friend who was a building contractor. And one day he came into my place, walked in, looked around, and he said, who the hell did this paint job? And I said, oh, I did. And he said, oh, well, it's not that bad, I guess. And I said to him, Hugh, what is it that you're seeing that isn't that bad? And he started pointing out to me the things that he saw. And so he walked in and just looked and saw the flaws. They were obvious to him because he was in the business and he was looking for those things. When he showed me those flaws, I couldn't unsee them. They were always there. I saw them. And not only did I see them in my work, I would see them when I would go out and look at other people's work. Because they became obvious. That's right. So when you become aware of what's obvious, then more becomes obvious. Until eventually, what's obvious to you in that moment is not obvious to other people at all.
But Robert, I've got to interrupt you here because I know people are listening and thinking, Jill, please just say this. So you're saying that, the more you do, the more you see, the more obvious things are to you, and that's how you are able to be psychic and
that's correct.
To be able to give a reading.
Yes.
But
people
are on the other side of the world, on the other side of the telephone.
Yeah.
And you don't know them. So where are you picking up on the obvious? How does it
How does it
fall into your head? How do you see it? Is it a knowing? Is it an impression? Do you see it like a movie? How does it work?
In many ways. Now, I really don't focus on putting a label on what I do. Am I a telepath? Am I a clairsentient? Am I a clairaudient? Am I a clairvoyant? I don't care. I'm not interested in a label. I'm not a medium. I'm not interested in a label. I'm interested in just giving information. So become aware of what's obvious, and then more becomes obvious. When I was doing a lot of radio shows, traveling, I used to always listen to the radio shows. I used to critique myself, pay attention to how I was performing on shows. And actually, even now today, I record all my readings, and I've been doing that since the 70s. Every month, I sit down and listen to 3 or 4 readings that I've done in the month, and I pay attention to how I'm giving the information, making sure it's fresh, making sure that I'm sounding like I'm really into it, making sure I'm using different words, that I'm not falling into patterns and routines. So I'm constantly reassessing that. So I was sometimes I'll be listening to a radio show, and when I'm actually doing a show, and the person calls up and tells me their first name, and I just go on this monologue.
But Robert, what do you see?
I'm just, the words come to my mind. They just come to my mind, and I say them. And then when I'm saying them, I'm also thinking to myself, Robert, anybody out there listening is going to know, this is just going to be so bloody obvious to them. You're going to get caught doing this, tricking people. And then when I listen to the recording of the show, and I get to that call, what I hear when I'm in a different state of mind is what I'm talking about is not obvious at all. But my awareness had expanded in that moment where I was seeing more, but it was just obvious. And so so it's just naturally expanding your awareness by first paying attention to what's in front of me. It just keeps expanding like that.
Okay.
So, and then words come to me. And I did a reading for you. Now, I think the reading I did for you was pretty much a monologue as well. I just started talking.
Yeah.
Did it seem like I was, what does it seem like?
Just like you and I are talking now.
Except
this is going to happen, and this has happened, and this happened in your past.
Sure.
And the reason this happened was because of this and this and this. And now this is what's going to happen in the future.
And I also, and I do it in a structured way also. It's very,
following a map.
Like I'm following a map. That's correct. Now, when I'm tuning in, I also ask people, don't interrupt me when I'm doing a reading, because what I'm saying isn't necessarily what I'm thinking about. And sometimes what I'm saying has already been processed. And I'm thinking about, while I'm saying what's been processed, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say, what I've already said, what I'm saying, and sometimes even what I might be doing later on that day, all at the same time. And all the it's like 4 or 5 television screens on the wall, and each one has a different channel. Each one's playing a different channel, and I'm looking at them, watching them back and forth. And if somebody interrupts me, it's like pulling the plug on the internet, and I lose the focus.
Right.
And what I do is I just let what comes to my mind come out, and I follow.
And Robert, do you think that with all your years of experience, compared to what you were doing 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago,
if I wanted to have a reading for me, I'd have it now.
like if you have the readings now, would the information be the same if somebody had a reading 5 years ago, or do you think you hone and hone and hone?
I am better today than I've ever been at any other time in my life. I see things on levels I never imagined. I'm seeing things in ways that I never imagined could be seen. And I'm doing things that I fell into accidentally doing things that are really advanced. I can't remember if I talked about this at the beginning. So when I'm doing a reading for somebody, if somebody's in a crisis, and when I tune in, I see a person's life from conception to completion. I don't see the actual details of either side, and I don't spend a lot of time at either end, but I do know when someone's life is going to be completed. And I talk about that. I often give them an indication that they're going to be around for a while. So if somebody's in a really difficult time, what I do is, and let's say they're 40 years old, what I do is I'll go into the future to when they're 80 or 85. And then I will look backward through their eyes in time to where they are right now at age 40. And I'll tell them how they feel about the way they solved this problem when they're 85. That's kind of an advanced technique. I actually don't know of anybody that does that. So I just started doing that, and I just started getting used to following timelines.
But you're just reading timelines.
Well, I follow it.
Yeah.
I'm following timelines. I get on the timeline and follow it, and I've always done that. That's what I've always done. I just follow the timeline, and it's also a manipulation of energies as well. So another thing that I do now, I don't like giving bad news.
Yeah, then I was just going to think they're 40 years old and you see them dead at 48. It's like, oh, there's the end of your timeline.
Well, that's right. Well, that's one of the things. I don't like giving bad news, but you have to. That's part of the job. It's a moral obligation to tell the truth, because if something can be seen, it can be changed. So if I can see something and tell that person, they have the power to change it. So it's my moral obligation to tell them.
The good and the bad.
It's also my moral obligation not to scare the living shit out of them at the same time.
Yeah.
So the technique I use is I look into the future and I look at the positive aspects of the crises they're going through right now. And I talk about that. And I talk about how wonderful it is and yada, yada, yada. And I talk all about that. Then I come back to today and I give just like a little wee bit of bad news. Change the subject. I change the subject. Then I come back and then give like a little bit more. Change the subject and do other stuff. Come back and then just give a little bit more and edge them into it.
So it softens the blow.
Softens the blow. And they already know they're going to get through it. And that's how I do it. So I instinctively go on timeline. So if I'm talking to somebody and they mention something, I'll just say, and I'll just follow a timeline and say, I usually don't say anything to them, but I just follow. And so I'm just used to going forward and backwards like that. It's just the way I think.
So how busy are you now, Robert? Because you're supposedly supposed to be retired, but you're not really because you love it so much.
Well, I've never been retired. I semi-retired, and I slowed down to about somewhere around 500-600 readings a year. I slowed right down to that. Because I appear on so many radio show or podcasts, and I have my own podcast, I'm still probably doing, 500-600 readings a year.
So how long does somebody have to wait to actually have a reading with you? How do they contact you?
They can contact me on my website. robertlindsymilne.com, or you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube.
TikTok.
Oh yeah, well, it's this thing, eh? So and I assure you, I am not doing belly dancing or exposing my hairy chest to the world. I assure you, I am not doing that on TikTok or anywhere. And also on YouTube. And my podcast is called My Side of the Crystal Ball. There's one other story. Well, there's a bunch of stories that I'd like to share. And my next podcast, this Wednesday, and this is what's going to be what I'll talk about. Miracles. Miracles are only miracle until you know how to do them. And when you know how to do them, they're not miracles anymore. And miracles are simply manipulating energy, manipulating or moving or balancing energy. That's all miracles are. Now, there are major league miracles, walking on water, like that's the gold medal round at the Olympics, right? You do that one, they put a gold medal around, a real gold, and they play the national anthem, and that's a big one. But the guy that does that walk on water, he didn't start there. He learned at other times. You don't start off at the gold medal round. So miracles are only a miracle till you know how to do it. And if you believe you can do something, you can do it. So the only reason you can't fly is because you absolutely believe you cannot. And the only reason you can't walk through a wall is because you believe you can't. So if you believed you could walk through a wall, you would be able to do it. Because if we believe it, we can do it. Now, wanting to believe and believing is a horse of a different color. It's very different. I want to believe as opposed to believe so you don't try doing the big ones like jumping off a bridge or something. You don't do those if you're
wanting to survive.
Yeah.
Because Robert, most people say, show me and then I'll believe. And you saying believe and then I'll show you. Like,
I'll see it when I'll believe it when I see it, and I'll see it when I believe it. And that's true. So one of the things that I've been really fascinated by my whole life is balancing energies. And I remember working when I was at Larry's Hideaway, and if there was ever a big fight in the bar downstairs, and there was often, like every week, and any of the males that were on duty at that day, they were had to go down and help break up the fight. And I had this fantasy, this dream of being able to walk downstairs, raise my hands, and command a barroom brawl to stop. And I thought that would be really cool to do. I could never do it. But over the years, what I have been doing, though, is studying how people react, what their energy is like when they're in conflict, when they're having a conflict. And often if two people are in a scrap, I stand close and I sense and feel their energy, and I watch how the energy goes, how it happens, what causes someone to leave or get away, what causes someone, because it happens fast, and I just started watching it over the years, like for, like 35 years, longer. So and I've intervened and stopped some fights without doing anything, saying anything, or doing it. But so this one time, it was about 5, 6 years ago. The reason I was out driving is because I decided I had to make a banana cream pie, and I had to have a fresh coconut. And I couldn't find any at the grocery store. It took me like an hour and a half. And I got to this one grocery store, and as I was about to go in, there was a walkway, and there was a dog tied up against a bike rack. There were a group of young men, 15 to 18 years old, and there was 10 to 12 or 15 of them. And they were in a group, and they were chanting. And their chants were quite intense. And they were revving themselves up. And they kept directing that energy to the dog that was tied up to the bicycle rack. And I was watching, and I thought, they can't do that. And I just stopped, and I took a breath, and I walked right smack dab in the middle of the group, right in the middle, like the eye of the hurricane, as it were. And I just stood there. And I didn't think anything. I didn't say anything. I just stood there quietly. And I made eye contact eventually with the leader of the group. And he said to me, "Is that your dog?" And I said, "No, but he's a friend of mine." And this kid all of a sudden kind of shook his head, and the energy in that group all of a sudden popped like a balloon, and the energy was gone. And when that happened, I just slowly walked over to the dog. And he was happy to see me. And I was patting the dog. And then that group just, when the energy was blown, it dissipated, and they just slowly all walked away. Now, if somebody would have seen that, they would say, "Oh, that's a miracle." It's not a miracle. It was balancing energy. But it could look like, but it's not a miracle. It was balancing energy. And it took me 30 plus years to do that one. Okay? So miracles are only miracles until you know how to do them. And then you practice, and then you do the little ones. Little ones like always having a parking space.
I call it the parking fairy.
Right. Okay? There. Now, that's a little miracle. Like if you're getting like 90% parking spots,
Yeah.
that's a miracle. You're manipulating the energy.
I just tell myself I always find a car park.
And that's because you believe it. You see? Right? That's because you believe it. So there is the foundation of balancing and manipulating energy. And you can take that and expand it anywhere you want. But there's something else that I learned that day. I've always been afraid that if I had an ability like that, I haven't been afraid, I know I would have. I for sure would have got pissed off and zapped somebody. I would have done it. I for sure I would have used it and hurt somebody. And I was always afraid of that. What I learned the last time that happened, when I walked in that group of young men, I didn't have any feelings about them at all.
Neutral.
I had no feelings about them at all. I was neutral, and I had no energy to attack them with. If I would have walked in there like that angry, they would have been on me.
They would have reacted to your anger. You were giving the anger out, so
absolutely.
they were giving the anger back.
Absolutely. So I realized that I couldn't have used that as a weapon. The other thing that I've discovered over my lifetime, I should maybe, when I do a reading, the one thing I have to be able to do or feel when I tune into the person is love. I have to feel love for that person. If I don't feel love, I can't do the reading. Now that doesn't mean I dislike the person if I don't feel love. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that person that I don't feel love. It could be that time, that moment, but I have to be able to feel love before I can tune in. And I have done some readings for some pretty awful people, but in the moment that I was tuning into them, I was able to feel love for them. And then when the reading was over, I'd see their sleaziness again. But in that moment, I have to feel love.
Well, sleazy people also need help.
That's true. And I can do that, but there are some times where a sleazy person, I don't feel love. And then there's angelic people that in the moment, I just don't feel love for them. In that moment, it's just whatever's going on with me.
Robert, we could just talk and talk forever, but look, we've been going for about an hour and a half, so I suppose...
No kidding, eh?
Yeah. Were you having a good time? Time flies. And I think we should really have another session.
Sure.
And
whenever you're ready.
With everybody, and then hopefully you're going to come on a world tour, and we can let people know where you're going to be and your services. I'm
planning to come to... at first it was just going to be Australia, but after talking with you and a couple of other people, I'm going to come to New Zealand as well, and it'll be in late 2022.
I think that's wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Robert, is there anything that you would like to say to the audience before we finish off?
Be good, be safe, and above all, always be kind.
I love that. What would Robert say? That's exactly what Robert would say.
That's what he does.
So, Robert, I'm going to, when I put this up, I'm going to put your contact details.
Please. And, if people are interested in having a reading, because I still do some, and I still have appointment times. And if you call, sometimes if somebody calls on one of my practice days, they're very likely to get a reading, because it's always better to do it rather than practice it. So if I'm at my computer and I haven't practiced for the day and somebody calls or sends in an email, there's a good chance they're going to get a reading in about 20 minutes after that, That happens.
You're still practicing after all these hundreds.
That's right. I'm still practicing. Oh, of course. I still am.
Robert.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's been an absolute delight. And
thank you.
I can't thank you enough for your time and your energy and your experience. And I'm really looking forward to our addendum to this one.
Okay. Well, when you would like me to, let me know. I'll be glad to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I hope you've all enjoyed Robert as much as I have. Wow, he hasn't told you half the stories. And we'll see you again. And everybody, take care.